My name is Mike and I am a retired Army Sergeant Major. I finished almost 32 years in the Army in 2019. These days, I spend a lot of time with my lovely wife, who I will call for this story. Betty, my wife, works about 15 hours a week, cooking for a caterer, and I sometimes help her if I am not out with my camera, attempting to be a photographer. I met my first wife, who I will call Lilith, while stationed at Fort Sam Houston in Texas. Lilith was from Palmdale, California, and was the daughter of a colonel there. The colonel did not like me. And when he seen I was getting close to his daughter, he had me transferred out and I found myself stationed at Fort Jackson in South Carolina. Lilith got angry at her dad and ran away and followed me. She was only 17 and I was still just 19. And I went right to see my first sergeant major and we got this fixed. Her dad came to Columbia and got his daughter. I put Lilith out of my mind. I spent the next 16 years in the Army rising through the ranks. And one day seeing Lilith walking around in Washington, D.C., it was during these almost 4 years, I was working out of the Pentagon doing mostly administrative work for one of the DoD undersecretaries. By this time, Lilith was 33 and I was 35. Her dad had also just passed away and she was living and working up in Maryland. She never married though. So to make a long story short, I asked Lila to marry me and we got married. This was in 2004 and I had orders to go on deployment to a country in the Middle East. I was there for almost 16 months when I was wounded by an IED. I was out of action for about a month and sent back home. I was transferred to Fort Polk and this is where my marriage started to fall apart. Lilith was not happy there. I tried to do something nice for her. So I bought a small dog, we called Stamps. Stamps was a cute dog that really loved Lilith. Lilith was working at a car dealership at this time. All I can say is I started to notice Lilith was not doing the things she used to do. Even Stamps seemed scared of her. I was at a loss of what to do. I suggested taking some leave and driving to Texas where her parents are buried, taking Stamps and just getting away for a while. It seemed like nothing I did was good enough. And Lilith and I grew apart. Then everything came unraveled one day when I got home and could not find Stamps anywhere. When Lilith got home, she did not seem to care. I looked all over the house and all over the local area. I had become really close to Stamps and I was getting sad. As I was walking back home, I decided to make a lost poster using an old photo of Stamps. I put some up all around the area. Lilith put no energy into any of it. By this time, we were sleeping in separate beds. I was at a local place near the post. When I came across a neighbor, he asked me if I could smell that odor around our homes. I had got noticed. We met back home and started walking around out in the woods. It did not take long to find the remains of a dog that looked like it could have been Stamps. Not much was left. I just figured Stamps got out and wandered out into the woods and got killed. I was crying a bit as I walked back home. I later went back and dug a deep hole and buried the remains where I found them the day Lilith told me she wanted a divorce. I did not get angry. I was not surprised and felt relief. She moved fast. I was served at home. Several days later, I hired an attorney. I was working when my attorney called me and said, "Mike, we have a problem." Lilith asked for and was granted a protective order. You can't go back home. I did get a chance under a watchful cop to come pack up my things. Then I started to read all the things Lilith accused me of doing. I was hitting her a lot. I was nasty to her. I would sabotage her car to prevent her from getting to work on time. I was even accused of some things of a sexual nature. I can't repeat in this story. Finally, the officer in charge told me, "Mike, this BS can end your career. Go see a shrink and get some help." It took me a long time to finally follow some advice. I hired a private investigator that my attorney recommended I use. It was expensive. I spent so much money on that private investigator. I had to sell almost 40 acres of property. My grandparents left to me in the end after weeks of work. He was able to get real proof. None of what Lilith was saying about me was true. He also discovered all 4 of her PS. So based on this proof, my attorney filed a cross-complaint against Lilith for adultery and we got a court date. The judge listened as Lilith was crying as she talked about how I hurt her. Then the judge said, "Do you have medical evidence to support your abuse timelines?" Her attorney said, "Only her word, Your Honor." Before the hearing started, my attorney wrote in large letters STFU on a piece of legal pad he was using. I looked at him and he said, "We have this, Sergeant. Don't mess it up." When it was time for my attorney to cross her, he started hammering Lilith about her. APC. Remember, the judge, after her attorney objected, did side with her that I can't ask about evidence, not entered and jointly agreed to by both parties. So my attorney stopped his questioning and waited on her attorney to close his case. He reserved the right to call her back. As soon as he did, my attorney called a private investigator to the stand. Every bit of my evidence was admitted over her attorney's objections. All I can say is that day was brutal for Lilith. The first words out of the judge's mouth when he rendered his decision was to void that protective order. Then he found for me in my complaint. This happened almost 7 years to the day Lilith and I got married. I remember sitting in my office crying. I thought I love Lilith. I was also thinking about what I won that day in court. I lost property that was valuable to me. I still had to pay that private investigator almost another $1,000. I had used up so much leave time. I was in a negative balance. Lilith left the area soon after our divorce hearing was over. I came home several months later to find a letter from her in it. She called me all sorts of things, told me how much she hated that damn dog and delighted in killing it. So the mystery of what happened to Stamps was solved for the next several years. I moved to Fort Sam Houston again and then to Korea. It was when in Korea, I met my current wife, Betty. I am only calling her Betty. She is Korean and is one of the sweetest people. I know Betty loves to cook. She is 100% feminine, and while she doesn't take any BS off of anybody, stays ladylike in everything she does. I am almost 12 years older than Betty. We were married in 2013 and had been married for almost 6 years. By the time I retired in 2019, my last duty station was a post on the East Coast, and Betty and I settled down in Williamsburg, Virginia. One day I heard a knock on my door. It was a process server serving me another complaint coming from Lilith. She had moved her residence to Virginia about a year earlier and was attempting to get part of my retirement. One of the first things I did was contact my old Louisiana attorney to see if he had kept all the evidence from my divorce. He had. He sent me certified copies of everything, along with a certified copy of our divorce paperwork. Several days later, Lilith had found some ambulance chaser attorney, and I found a fantastic lady who was laughing at Lila's attempt to get part of my retirement. My attorney told me in almost every situation, even with residency, the Virginia family courts would defer to the other state unless it has something to do with children or an estate matter. She was sure there would be no hearing. Well, there was one. The judge did not take long. He simply asked if there were any changes since the divorce was final. Her attorney said, "Well, I had retired, and after 7 years of marriage, she was entitled to something." My attorney is a sharp lady. She told the judge she had all the evidence that just looked at, as well as an affidavit that had his notarized signature. The judge just said he did not need to see any of that. He asked Lilith again if there was anything that had changed since our divorce. Had we had sex? Had I made any promises to her that are documented? All those answers were no still. She stood by her opinion. I was legally bound to share my retirement with her. The judge simply tossed the case and warned Lilith about using Virginia courts for frivolous purposes while I wore a business suit to court. Both Betty and I were wearing special t-shirts I had made just for that day. I stripped down to mine and Betty put hers on over her dress. It had a large photo of stamps and simply said "for stamps." I know for a fact, Lilith seen that shirt not too long after this happened. I started to notice Lilith all over this area. I could walk into a Walmart and see Lilith walking around. Lilith is simply a psychopath that is capable of hurting another person. I asked my attorney about a protective order. She helped me get one. The problem is Lilith continues to violate it, and the